From Fairfax, Virginia, this is Out of the Past with Chuck Langdon and Lee Shephard, an in-depth discussion with some of the most fascinating people of our time, many of them with strong area connections. Now, today's Out of the Past.
Welcome to Out of the Past. I'm Chuck Langdon with co-host Lee Shephard.
Thank you, Chuck. Whenever people in Washington get together and talk about the top musical hosts on radio, they just about always mention two names. One, Felix Grant, the other, Bill Mayhugh. We're lucky to have with us today Bill Mayhugh. Welcome to Out of the Past.
I'm delighted to be here.
His lovely wife, Shirley Mayhugh.
Thank you.
But at the time,
being here.
And actually, Shirley, you were more famous, I believe, than Bill was back when you two met.
Oh, I don't think so.
Shirley,
let's discuss that. We'll make the decision.
Yeah. She was a very well-known singer in this town, and under the name of Sherry
Gibson.
Mm-hmm. And your real name, do you mind if I tell what your real name was?
No.
Shirley Culpepper.
Right.
They named a town after her. Actually, it was her relatives were Culpeppers.
Yes. They didn't leave us any money at all.
Now, let me tell the folks who may not remember, you were a singer, a fashion model, a dancing teacher.
Part-time.
And you even went to Hollywood for a year.
I went to Los Angeles and signed up with Blue Book Models.
That's Marilyn Monroe's outfit.
And that's the one that put her into the picture, the nude photograph. And she was under contract to them at the time. And I stayed about a year, or 6 months, I guess. And I was homesick. I missed my family, so I wanted to come home for the holidays. This was December holidays. And she told me when I got back that she had set up a screen test for me. Well, I never got back to L.A., and I didn't do the screen test, so.
Was it because of this young man, this young drummer that you had met, Bill Mayhugh?
Probably was. Yeah, I think so. That's because I didn't go back.
So, Bill, you know, she would be a very well-known movie star today if she hadn't married you.
And I'd be rich.
And that is, you started out as a drummer, didn't you?
I did. I started as a drummer and worked at it from 1949 until I got my first night radio show. And then I decided I ought to be in radio and television, and I got a lot of great advice from a lot of wonderful people.
Did you play in the band when Sherry Gibson sang?
No, I was already doing radio and
shows.
TV when she...
So she didn't know you as a musician?
No.
Not really.
How did you meet?
I had a dead battery in my car out at Glen Echo one night, and she was there, and she jump-started my battery for me.
I thought you met at WMAL.
We did. We did. I was doing a fashion show, a bathing suit fashion show, televised that night. And it was in the studio with all these girls in bathing suits. And Bill passed by, and he had to come in and find out what was going on. And Joanne Holler, a friend of mine, introduced us. And that was 1954, so that's how we met.
And 4 years later, on the 19th of April, we were married.
1958.
1958. And next April will be 52 years. She used to tell all her girlfriends that, of course, we've been married 51 years. He was out of the house all night for 30 years. And then she would add, I knew where he was, but he didn't know where I was.
That's interesting. Birds of a feather flock together. The two of you had what are considered insecure types of jobs, radio,
right,
modeling
and singing.
But because of you both had the same type of interest where enjoying what you do is more important probably than other things.
Oh, we've had a great time.
It stayed. It worked.
It worked.
I believe in the old saying, if you love what you do, it isn't work. And I loved going on radio and television. And I also loved playing drums. But you know who the name John Kluge?
Yes.
I was at WGAY in Silver Spring, and Kluge was running it at the time. He owned it. And he called me into the office one day, and he said, Bill, you've been with us almost a year and a half, and you haven't improved. And he said, I understand you play drums. And I said, yes, I do, Mr. Kluge. He said to me, well, I think you should stick to drums because you do not have a career ahead of you in radio and television. Later, and this is just an aside, Mr. Kluge had Shirley and myself down to his estate in Charlottesville just recently.
Did you remind him of what he did?
He said, what do I know? And he's only a billionaire.
He's been very kind. He's been very kind to us. And his estate's unbelievable. 18-hole golf course built for him by Arnold Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
How nice.
And we played it.
So how did you get to MAL? I'm curious about your
career.
Well,
I was at MAL twice. I started at WFAX in Falls Church, Virginia, for no money. I was playing drums. I just wanted to get into radio if I could. And I stayed there 3 months and went to WGAY in Silver Spring, where Mr. Kluge was. Stayed the year and a half, and he canned me. And I went over to WPIK in Alexandria. And while I was at PIK, the general manager of Dumont Television listened to me driving into work in the morning and called me up and asked me if I'd like to work weekends at Dumont Television, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. And I said, yes, I would. So I went over there, and Matt Warren was the program director. And he said, Bill, let's go downstairs, have a beer. I need to talk to you. And that evening, he said to me, do you like radio and television? I said, I love it. He said, you better darn sight learn how to speak the English language. Dead serious. Mm-hmm. How lucky I was that someone would take the time to tell me that. And he sent me to a voice teacher named Louis B. Thompson over at First and Rhode Island Avenue, northeastern Washington. And I called Mr. Thompson and asked him if I could come over, and I knocked on his door. He opened the door. I said, Mr. Thompson, I'm Bill, and he slammed the door in my face. True story. I'm standing there. I knock on the door again. He yells through the door, who is it? I said, it's Bill Mayhugh. He opens the door. He says, that's how to introduce yourself. Now get in here.
And you went in there with that nut?
That's a good story.
Yeah. No. And I studied with him till he passed away. 7 years with him.
You liked him a lot, didn't you?
Oh, I loved him. He gave me my talent as far as the voice and what I was doing. Little silly things like, what did you do this weekend, Bill? I said, we went down to the Smithsonian. He said, what'd you learn? I said, what do you mean, Louis? What did I learn? You know, they got the Spirit of St. Louis hanging from the ceiling, and they have the First Lady's gowns, and they have the coin collection. He said, but what did you learn? And I said, I don't know what you mean, Louis. He said, who is Smithsonian? How many buildings do they have? How is it financed? I said, I don't know. He said, you didn't learn a damn thing, did you? And he was good with me.
I think that segues into a technique you used when you were on the air all the time, that you would always be reading and studying in order to communicate with the listeners. Although you had no two-way conversation going, you were able to mention things that were of interest. And wasn't that a technique? Did you pick that up?
Yes, it was. And I was convinced by Louis that people don't sit in groups and listen to the radio. It's a woman in the kitchen doing the dishes. It's a man driving an automobile. It's a worker's got a little small radio next to him. And he said, you must speak just as though you're talking to one person, not pronouns, not announs, as he would say. He said, just talk to people like they're human beings, because guess what? They are.
So much for that ladies and gentlemen approach. Huh?
Yes. Yeah, that pontificating was a word he used all the time. I used not to be able to pronounce it.
Of course, you were in the middle of the night, so that's kind of a calm.
I think most people remember you now, Bill, as the all-night music man there on WMAL.
I think that 30 years.
30 years will do it.
Is in the folks' mind.
But you know, I listened too, but then I would hear you the next night talking about all the places you went and who all you met the next day, and I'm thinking, when does this man sleep?
Not often.
Really? He must not. He must not. Did you ever get sleep?
Oh, yeah. Right at the top of my backswing. I'd drop off to sleep. No, I loved what I was doing. I keep repeating that, but it's absolutely true. And I was a firm believer that if I got out in public, and say there were 100 people at the golf tournament, or whatever, 3 or 4 of them are going to tune in to find out what I sound like on the radio if they haven't heard me before. And I played tons of charity golf tournaments because I would promote it before it happened. I would MC the award dinner at the tournament, and then I'd go back on the air at night and talk about it again.
I counted that you worked with about 34 charities or something, offered services.
I did.
Yes.
I was so honored to be invited to do it. My Leukemia Radiothon, which I hosted the full 24 hours for 22 years, and we raised millions and millions of dollars for the fight against leukemia. And I'm very proud of that. I'm proud that I got invited to be involved, and wish I could do it all over again.
I want to talk to Miss Tappa. You were Miss Everything back then. Miss Tappa, what was that?
It was Miss Tappa Cola. It was a Diet Cola. It was the very first diet drink on the market. And I was saying that I won the contest, but Tappa Cola fizzled. It didn't make it. But then I was in Miss Motorama. I won the Miss Motorama contest. And then I thought, well, if I can win that, I can win the Miss Washington. And of course, I was in the Miss Washington. I was a runner-up. And then I thought, well, let's go to the auto show. So I did that, and I was runner-up there. And Bill can tell you that story.
Tell us, Bill.
There were 4 Ames brothers, a vocal group, and
I
had been invited to be the judges at this contest. And we didn't pick her. And to pay me back,
I married him. I said I'm going to marry him and make him pay for the rest of his life because he didn't vote for me.
Well, Shirley, did he ever say, I'm sorry or anything like that?
No, because the girl that won was really beautiful. She had long black hair. Her name was Joanne Holler, and she's the one that introduced us.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. 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 Did you have a crush on her?
Always.
Oh, okay. I thought so.
And I think you were Miss Utility.
Oh, I was, yeah. Isn't that silly? I was
Miss Utility Truck.
Miss Utility
Yeah,
Truck. Mm-hmm. It was a utility truck company. And I was singing at the Madrillon at the time, and I did a modeling show, and one of the secretaries was there, and she said, I think Mr. Utility would like to see you. We're looking to promote our company. So I won Miss Utility Truck, and I went up to Atlantic City and worked their conventions. And that was fun. You know, that was exposure.
You know, Chuck, I got a great idea. I know who the next Miss Out of the Past show is. You've just won.
Oh, all right.
And if the three of us are the judge, you have a chance to recoup if you'll vote with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
What few people know, Bill, now, seriously, what few people know is Bill was one of the first talk show hosts here in Washington. Isn't that correct, Bill? I'm talking about Glen Echo, the bands, the shows you did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. But that was the music show to the Mutual Network when I was at WOL. Every Friday night they'd have a big band, and I was invited to be the host for that. And enjoyed that very, very much. I also did a show called Midnight with Mayhugh from the grill room of the Ambassador Hotel.
That's the one I was thinking about.
Yeah, is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes, because you did interviews and all of that stuff.
Yeah. The only connected mafia man I ever knew was a friend of mine. And I would be sitting up at the table doing the thing to this room full of people at the grill room, and he'd walk up in back of me, and when the commercial was on, he'd tap me on the back, and he'd say very quietly, tomorrow night, Rocky Marciano will be your guest. He'll get here at 20 minutes after midnight.
And you will interview him.
and then this guy would walk away, right? What's I going to do, not have him on?
No.
And about 3 months later, something like that, I'd get a tap on the back. And he'd say, the wrestler Primo Canary is coming in. Do him right after 12 midnight news, because he hadn't got a lot of time. He wouldn't say, will you? Or do you mind? He would tell me that that's what I was going to do. And you know Don Rickles?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Can I tell them that
I
story?
don't know if you should tell them that story.
I'm going to.
Go ahead.
thought
Go
so.
ahead, Bill.
You can edit it out, right? If you want. My mother, who was very, very religious, the Ninth Street Christian Church in Northeast Washington, had told all her church members that she was going down to see Bill's radio show. And it happened that Don Rickles' mother was here. And Don Rickles' mother and my mother were seated up on the little balcony. And Rickles comes around after a show at the Wayne Room, and I said, Don, I want to welcome you to one of the really nice rooms in Washington. He says, what do you mean nice? Look at those two hookers over there.
Pointing to his
True
mother.
story.
And
he pointed
Bill's
to his
mother.
mother and my mother. My mother lived to age 87 and despised him
Never
because
liked him.
she was convinced everybody in the church who had tuned in
I've been listening.
knew that she had been called that.
I love the interaction where the couples who come on talk to each other and share the stories and
make comments.
And make comments, yes.
Well, you know,
Shirley, that's
actually,
true.
besides that mafia guy Bill told you about, was his assistant, the real power behind Mr. Mayhugh was Shirley.
Yes.
You helped line up interviews. You helped the legwork, so to speak.
Well, not all of it, but I did some of it. I enjoyed it very much. I think what I enjoyed the most was when we had the Leukemia Radiothon and helping out there and making all that money for research for leukemia. And then eventually my sister died of leukemia. She was 51. Yeah.
Well, Bill, the other guys like myself consider that an unfair advantage because we had to do all of that just by ourselves. We didn't have Sherry Gibson with us.
Yeah.
How did you pick that name?
Don Hearn, remember Don Hearn that wrote for the news? Was it the news?
Yes,
News,
yes.
what,
He was there the evening that I was to begin singing with Joe Rickardell's orchestra there at the Harlequin Room in D.C., at the Sheraton Carlton. And they didn't like my name Culpepper. It was not a stage name. It just didn't sound good. So there was a hotel, was it in Chicago? The Sheraton Gibson. And he said, I like the name Sherry. How about, and a Gibson girl, how about Sherry Gibson? I said, okay, it's all right. So I sang under the name of Sherry Gibson.
You'll never know just how much I love you, and you'll never know if you don't know now.
great singer. Knew her talent, knew it well.
Did you sing any jingles for that Tapa Cola or anything like that?
No, I was just in the contest.
Did you model a Sherry Gibson?
Oh, no. Well, most of my modeling was before that, and the teaching and dancing. But I had a name when I first started modeling under Shirley Curtis. So I've had lots of aliases, But I went under the name of Shirley Culpepper when I was modeling.
Where did you model?
I modeled at Garfinkel's, Cannes, Tech Company, Landsberg's.
With an
Woody's?
agency?
Well, I joined Shy Incorporated, owned by Julie Shadell, and her partners, Henson and Young. That's how they got SHY. And they got me jobs. And I taught dancing part-time also. And then when I was modeling a show for Garfinkel's, Phyllis Bell was there, and she asked me if I would teach modeling for her at her agency part-time. So I did, and I enjoyed it very much. But I continued to model on the side, and I continued to do tea shows, and I continued to do singing engagements. And then I finally started teaching for her full-time, and I loved it. I really did. And I was there teaching with her when Bill and I got married. And I continued to do that until our first was born. That was Scott. That was 1960. And then 1965, Jack came along, joined the family. But my career was probably, I'd say, over by 1960. I continued to model a little bit after I got married, but not very much. But I stayed home and took care of my children.
I think if you hired Chuck and Lee as your agents, you could go back to work and I could retire.
Yes,
I
yes.
think so.
You are retired.
I am.
My wife keeps telling me I
That's what
should
you tell
retire, but she says you don't do anything now anyway. But
I have a question for you, Bill.
Yes, sir.
Only because I was told that people who worked with you, that you had the technique in the middle of the night of putting a record on and maybe looking as though you were dozing off, but the timing was always perfect, that you'd be right back up again to go on live mic. Was that?
That's partially
Not
true.
looking. He was dozing.
That's partially
He did
true, but back then we had engineers, and the floor of the studio was carpeted, and I'd introduced South Pacific or The King and I or whatever, and it's going to run for 55, 56 minutes, something like that. And I'd usually just lie down in the studio and take a nap. And the engineer would wake me. And one time, the engineer went to sleep while I'm sleeping. So we get, the show ends, and the record is going like that in the dead groove, just going around. And until the newsman sitting in another part of the studio realized all of a sudden there's nothing on the air, he comes in and wakes the two of us up, and it's like 3 minutes after 5 o'clock, because I played the shows 4 to 5, and then I did the last hour alive.
Alive? I'm glad you were alive.
Hopefully alive. But I never forget that. But you know, I didn't get fired for it. I didn't get penalized for it. We were very lucky.
You had to sleep sometime.
Well, yeah.
I just heard that you could sit there and look like you were asleep, but then be able to.
No, I had that hour off. I was on midnight to 6.
Yeah.
Those 30 years. Felix Grant was on 7 to midnight, and I followed him. And we were on radio, Chuck, at a time when we were allowed to play what we want, say what we want, interview whomever we wished, and they would support us, and they would support it. I don't think radio is that way today. At least I can't find a radio station that I hear that. And MAL, at the time I was there, was considered the #1 station in the city. Not for me, but for Hardin and Weaver and Trumbull and Core. And
I think WMAL's theory was just like yours, going to the golf tournaments and emceeing, that 2 or 3 people would say, hey, what does he sound like, and listen. They took that same approach with Hardin and Weaver, too.
Oh, they did.
They gave out Hardin and Weaver hats. And
oh, my, yes, and they had the Hardin and Weaver golf tournament every year.
They sent them out all over
Keeping in
town.
touch with the community.
Yeah.
At that time.
And I swear, if I leave this mortal coil now, I really do not have a complaint. No complaint.
We had a good life.
And we met so many marvelous people. Goodness gracious.
We did.
Haven't we?
Did you talk about those experiences during the night as you were playing the different records? What did you fill with? And
yeah, I talked about where I'd been, who I may have met, what they were like, always being generous about that part of it. And I never met anybody nasty. I don't remember meeting anybody that I came home and said to Shirley, I never said, honey, I met the rudest person I've ever seen, heard in my life. That just didn't happen. And I used to MC the Redskins Welcome Home Luncheon. And that was always fun. I got a chance to introduce the Redskins that I admired so much, because I was an avid Redskin fan. Avid. Prior to Snyder. I was an
Would you like to elaborate on that bit?
No. Don't get us started.
so, what are you doing now, Bill? What are you
looking for
filling
a job.
your time?
Looking for a job.
I think you're playing the piano. I understand.
Well, see, you ought to get a hobby like Chuck and I have, which is this show. It's our hobby.
Do you need a third co-host?
Sure.
Certainly we do.
We'd love to have you.
Are you playing the piano, practicing, and trying to improve your skills?
I'm just about ready to start doing it again. I don't know that you know the story of the 3 men with whom I studied. One was a man named Art Carcetti, who plays every Saturday night at the University Club down on 16th Street. And the second man I studied with was a very popular and famous one named John Eaton, with whom I studied for a lot of years. And the other one was a man named Mel Clement, who was probably one of the most respected of pianists. And all three of them, after my studying with them, had me sign a waiver which said, at no time have I been the student of Mel Clement, John Eaton, or Art Carcetti.
Mel Clement was wonderful. I told him, I said, you don't play the piano, you caress it. He was really good.
Mel was lovely. Well, and he had the nicest way of teaching. He would sit with his back to me. He loved to smoke, and he would smoke, and I would be over there playing the piano. And he would write out chord changes for me, and I would practice them for a week, and then I'd go back for the lesson. And he'd sit there, and he'd say, all right, play what we did, what I gave you. So I'm playing it, and he said, wait a minute. You played an A natural there. That's A flat. If you don't put the A flat in, the next chord is not going to be correct. And how he heard those things in his ear.
Well, with the piano and the drums, you have a new career in music.
Thank you.
I would suggest that.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're out of time.
Boy, we're going to have you back again.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'd love it.
Well, I took up too
You
much.
promised to bring Shirley.
I took up too much time.
No,
Thank you both. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you. We are
Enjoyed
honored
it.
to be
Thank you
here.
for inviting us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us on Out of the Past. Lee and I will be back.
Next week, hopefully.
Yes.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. Welcome to Music, Memories, and Mayhugh. And I'm the Mayhugh part of that. I'm going to be here for the next hour and play some music for you. Some of it I have collected over a 40-year career. Some you may have heard, some maybe you've never heard, some you wanted to hear again, and maybe a surprise or two. We'll have a moment with some of my friends who are musicians and entertainers and singers. I thought we'd start today with a song Cy Oliver arranged for the Tommy Dorsey Band in July of 1942, and believe it or not, Irving Berlin wrote this. It's called Mandy, Make Up Your Mind. From July of 1942, and it sounds terrific today. The only thing that saddens me is that youngsters today don't get to hear that kind of stuff. That's too bad.